Greetings, everyone. Aloha and welcome to the Center for Chinese Studies webinar series at UH Manoa. My name is Wensen Wang. I'm a moderator and organizer of this series, and I teach Minqing China in the History Department. Today's presentation and dialogue is the second event of our newly launched sub-series called Understanding China. This sub-series aims to foster more systematic, more balanced understanding of China from a variety of disciplinary and thematic perspectives. As China's importance on the global stage increases daily, so does the importance of understanding it, its past, present, and future. Today's topic is family, gender, and one-child policy in contemporary China. It's a very important and timely topic given the recent major policy shifts on those critical issues. As we know, declining fertility rate, shrinking labor force, and a rapidly aging population are among the most formidable challenges confronting China and many other countries right now. We are very glad to have two experts with us today, Professor Jing Guo and Professor Mei Rong Miu. They will help us make sense of those important changes and their profound implications. Before I introduce the two speakers, on behalf of the CCS, I would like to thank you all for your participation. A special mahalo to Dr. Niu, who is joining us from Harvard University in Washington, D.C. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce the hardworking team of CCS staff members led by current director Professor Minbao Yu, Associate Director Dr. Cindy Ning, and the Program Coordinator Ms. Jianing Sun. During this session, if you have any questions about technical or logistical issues, please use the chat forum that will be monitored and answered by Dr. Lin and Ms. Sun. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Department of Social Work at UH. We would like to thank and acknowledge our co-sponsor for their support. Please know that today's session is being recorded. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two distinguished speakers today. The main speaker is Professor Jing Guo. She is Associate Professor in the Thompson School of Social Work and Public Health at UH. She serves as chair of the Department of Social Work and chair of the PhD in Social Welfare program in Thompson School. Professor Guo received her PhD from UC Berkeley and MA from the Beijing University. Her research centers on comparative family policy in relation to work-family balance, gender equality, and child development. Our second speaker today is Professor Mei Rong Miu. She is Associate Professor at Harvard University School of Social Work. Her research focuses on the impact of various social welfare policies and programs, including the implementation of child care, health care, financial training, and other support services designed to assist the low-income working families. In terms of format, Professor Guo will first speak for about 30 minutes, then Professor Niu will engage her in a brief conversation before we open up for Q&A. At any time during the presentation, we invite our audience to use the Q&A forum instead of the chat function to send your comments or questions, which we will monitor and present to our speakers after their presentations. Please do not wait to send your questions until the very end, because then we might run out of time to answer them. In order to accommodate everyone, we kindly ask that you please keep your comments concise and ask no more than 2 questions. We'll try to take the questions in the order they have been submitted, but sometimes we have to synthesize or group them together due to the limitation of time. After today's presentation, we'll send out a brief survey to our audience, and we would greatly appreciate if you could take a minute or two to give us some feedback. So without further ado, let me first turn over to Professor Guo Jing.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Thank you for the very kind introduction. Aloha, everyone. Welcome to this session. As Professor Wang mentioned, our topic focuses on family and gender in modern China. It's a broad topic, so in this talk, I will primarily focus on two areas. First, to introduce the family, marriage, and gender ideology as a background to understand this family and gender issue in China. Secondly, I'll present the infamous one-child policy in China and its reform over the years. Dr. Liu and I will have a conversation on related questions, and we'll make sure to leave time for questions and answers. First, as a background, China is one of the most populous countries. According to China's seventh census data in 2020, the total population is about 1.4 billion, and urbanization rate has reached over 60%. The newest data show the total fertility rate is only 1.3, which is way below the 2.0 replacement rate. This is the background of China's population and total fertility rate. Speaking of family tradition, in traditional China, it's strongly influenced by the patriarchal Confucian values. In this traditional value system, the gender relations is considered women's status inferior to men in the family and social life. Traditionally, women are restricted or primarily occupied and focused on in the family domain. There's a famous 3 obedience rule. It states girls should obey to their father, and wives should obey to the husband, and widows should obey to the adult son. As this rules also traditional value indicates to really show the inequality of status between men and women. So traditional value does represent a male dominance cultural frame. As a result, Chinese society or families have a strong preference of sons. Again, this is a strong traditional culture, but China's society also has been evolving and changing in recent decades. One of the major changes is post-1949. Under the new People's Republic of China, the government is started and promoted the gender equality. Some scholars consider it as a state feminism. Through this state feminism, the Chinese government used legislatives such as Chinese constitutions to protect the equal rights for women in the political, economic, and social life. Government encourage and promotes women's role in the paid labor force or paid employment. And the value was presented and promoted is believe women can hold half of the sky, and women have the equal rights to participate in the paid labor force. At the meantime, to support such state feminism or gender equality, there are supportive social and family policies during the states-run planned economic period time. For example, states support more generous maternity leave, and work units, so-called 单位 sponsored nursery and childcare are provided. Working mothers are allowed to have breaks to nursing babies. So such series of the social support and the services are provided to support the efforts from the states engaged gender equality efforts. As a result, female employment rate in China has been relatively high. In the early 1980s. The female employment rate for the population age 15 above has been among the highest in the world. At that time, can reach over 80%. However, over the past few decades, there has seen decrease of the female employment rates in China, particularly for the women with younger children. The interruption of the job interruption more likely to happen among those group of women. At the same time, because the gap between employment rates, there also increased the gap of gender gap in labor force participation and the gender pay gap. So this is the challenge and the background for understanding the gender and family in modern China. At the same time, when we look at the family and the marriage, over these years, China has experienced declined marriage rates and see the increased marriage age, which is along with many other developing and developed countries. However, the universal and early marriage pattern remain true in Chinese society. Studies show by age of 35 to 39, almost all women are married, and less than 5% of men remain single. And the marriage age, or the mean age for first marriage, are still focused on the 20s. As the data shows, mean age for marriage are at 25 and 23 for men and women respectively. In addition, there are also a close linkage between marriage and fertility, or having children, so-called marriage package. In China, the non-marital births are still rare, and even though in recent years there's a growing minority phenomena, see the non-marital cohabitation, which more likely happen among the most highly educated group. Yet, even in this newly developed phenomena, the premarital cohabitation can still serve as a precursor to marriage. People still have a strong belief of the linkage between marriage and having family, having children. As a fun fact, if you look at the Chinese language, the bride in Chinese is 新娘. Literally, it translates to new mothers, as it indicates of the linkage between marriage and family and having children. Have that said, consider the traditional family value and the past few decades, states intervene in promotion of gender equality. When we look at the family and marriage life, consider the gender relations and gender ideology. We still see those trends in Chinese society. One, there is still gendered division of household work. Women are still the primary caregivers or providers to taking care of household work and the child-related activities. Within marriage, the decision-making power also suggesting the women are more focused on or occupied with mundane and child-related decision-making and activities. And male or husbands are symbolically or substantially are still considered as the main decision-making regarding the family finance and economic decision-making. So in short, the male breadwinner as a model still is the primary pattern in Chinese family and gender relation within family and marriage. One study show how this expectation of a gender role between men and women or husband and wife and relate to family members' happiness. Finding was interesting. It's suggesting the male's fulfillment to this expectation of being the primary providers or breadwinner for the family have direct positive relationship with family members' happiness. On the other hand, women's income or women's contribution as a provider are not directly related to the family's happiness. As the indicator, the strong male dominance, male breadwinner model still apply to China's family. There are also uneven changes in gender attitudes. As we just see the female employment pattern in China that has reached an overall consensus as early as back in the 1990s. The society agreed women have the role in the paid in the paid labor force. Women have the rights to go work outside home. However, they're still involving changing attitudes in terms of gender equality in job rights, in leadership position, in the right to education. So there's still the room of evolving and changing. Some recent study even suggesting some backlash of the gender equality attitude change in the modern China. So add to this, we consider this marriage and family pattern and gender ideology among Chinese society and in families when those pattern is not equally represented across different social economic group. If we look at education, the universal and early marriage pattern is particularly true for the women with low education level, but less so for men with the low education level. And when we look at the pattern of delayed marriage, those mostly happen among the social group or have a college education. But as said before, even with highly educated group, most of them eventually still get married. So marriage and family life still is very important for in Chinese society. Relate to that, social medias and public discourse have discussion on some new social phenomena such as leftover women and surplus men. Those are the new social issues under the changes of the family and marriage and the gender equality in China. So that's the very brief background to understand Chinese family, traditional value, gender relations, and the current family and marriage pattern in China. Now I want to turn to look into one-child policy and its implementation over the years and its recent reform or changes. One-child policy is considered as a family planning policy. And so we look at one of the primary goal is population management. And so I want to present from this angle to see back in the 50s and 60s, there was no explicit family planning policy, but their studying have implicit suggesting and the guidance from the government starting very soon. In the 50s and 60s, Chinese society experienced one of the first population expansion, and total fertility rates reached as high as 6 in the 60s. However, with the China's social economic development, particularly in the urban area, under the state's planned economic system, and in order to balance the demands of created by the rapid population expansion and the management of economic development in the urban areas. Since the 1970s, the state starting promote the voluntary family planning. One of the slogans in the 70s was 晚稀少, which refers to 晚, encourage late marriage, 稀, encourage long spacing between births, and 少, to encourage fewer births by the family. So government is starting to promote those family planning ideas. At the meantime, if we look at the data in the 1970s, fertility rates in China has already begun to decline. In 1970, it's still as high as 5.47, but by the end of the 70s, in 1979, the total fertility rate has been decreased to 2.81, which is a significant decrease. And also the age at first marriage has been increased as well. Okay, what we often hear to see China's one-child policy is officially starting in the 1980s. On September 25, 1980s, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China sent out an open letter to all its members and the Communist Youth League members on the issues of controlling the population growth. The letter indicates to slow down the population growth and to support economic development, or the party encourage only one child per couple in China. Even though it came out as a format of open letter to the party members, but it soon been implemented as national policy, or one of the basic national policy. So in the 1980s, this one-child policy are implemented across the country. Given at that time the large disparity between the urban and the rural area, policy implementation has shown different patterns. In urban area, the one-child policy has been restrictively implemented, and given the rapid economic development and also almost guaranteed or planned labor force employment opportunities, there was less resistance in the urban area. However, the situation is quite different in the rural area, given rural families heavily depending on their children, particularly their sons, for their family labor and also for their old age welfare and security. So that was a much greater resistance in the rural areas among the rural families. I also want to make a note, even from beginning, for China's most ethnic minority groups, there has always been two-child policy, or in certain areas such as Tibet, there was no limitations on family planning. Follow-up to consider the strong resistance or challenges of the policy implementation in rural areas. In 1984, there's a major alteration on this one-child policy in rural areas. The new adjustment states the couple in rural area can have a second child if their first child was a girl, and also with a requirement of the spacing of 4 years between the first birth and the second birth. Move on in the 1990s. This one-child policy were move forward as more decentralized implementation. We see more differences across province and the regions. For example, some province starting experimental and do alternation or changes in the late 1990s. Some place the couple who are both the only child are allowed to have the second child. So the pressure of the population structure starting filled by certain cities and regions. Actually, by the early 2000s, all province except Henan province has give one form or another those alterations of a policy implementation. If both couple are only child, they're allowed to have a second child. Meanwhile, I want to say during the early stage in the 80s and 90s, they were punitive measures has been used to implement or enforce the one-child policy, such as start from 1982, there was fines for excessive births. Later on, the term or the nature of this measures has been changed in 1992 called out of quota birth fees, and 2000 it changed to social maintenance fee, and those measures has been used in both urban area and the rural area to implement and enforce those policies. Over those years, one of the big promotion is consider or encourage the gender equality in a way to consider a boy, a girl, a son and a daughter are equally good for the families. The importance is to have healthy babies and it support the family. However, China does pay the big social cost to have this one-child policy. So by the time of 19 the recent years, by the time of 2013 and 2015, we see some significant reform. We are entering the new era of two-child era. In November 2013, again through the Central Committee of Communist Party, issued a major report on deepening social reform. And in that reform, restates family planning still as the basic national policies. However, the major policy confirms couples are allowed to have a second child if either parent is an only child. As you recall, I just said, previously, some local regions and province already start the implementation like this. But by the time of 2013, the national government confirmed this policy to allow the couple who both are the single child can have two children or have a second child if they wish to do, if they want to. And 2 years later, implement this, the first changing. 2 years later, in October 29, 2015, the Central Committee of the Communist Party announced the universal two-child policy, which means all couples will be allowed to, are allowed to have two children, second child if they want to. This officially ends the almost 35 years one-child policy in China. Move forward this year, in June of this year, the Central Committee of the Communist Party again announced a new policy to see further loosening the family planning policy. All couples are allowed to have up to 3 children, 3-child policy. So we see China are in this stage to has been reformed their one-child policy and their family planning policy, but at the same time, at this stage, to consider the future directions. Would this new era of 2 children, 2-child or 3-child have the impact for the families and for the societies? A lot of discussion involved. We need a supportive measure to make the implementation of new reform possible for the families and for people. So I will stop here. That's the overview of one-child policy and its changes and reforms over the past decades, and the most recent change, which basically ends the one-child policy. China are now in the 3-child area, and there are a lot of issues and questions and opportunities are related to this policy change. I'll stop here and invite my colleague and friends, Dr. Liu, to join me and to have further conversation on this related topic. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Guo, for a very rich information presentation. It is very interesting to look at the change of the China's family planning policy, and accordingly the change in gender ideology and the attitude towards family and to have children in China. So this presentation started from family, the traditional China, the traditional ideology of family, state feminism, to family and gender in China, to one child, to the change of the family planning policy. I think it's very interesting the dramatic change in the family planning policy in China in the past several decades. So the first question, what do you think the motivated the change of such family policy from one child to 2-child and now to 3-child policy in the past several decades? Because especially in the last 10 years, right, we see a dramatic change from 2 children to 3 children, and to the point, China is actually encouraging families to have more children and to come up with supporting measures. What is the motive of the change?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think looking at the motivation of the change for most the recent reforms starting from 2013 and 2015 and this year's changing to three-child policy, I think the primary driving force are the the population structure. So China has experienced the sharp decrease of total fertility rates and low birth rates. And as we see in the slides now, the new data, total fertility rates as low as 1.3, which is one of the lowest rates among the world. And given the large population, this creates a huge problem on the family structure and raise the challenge of the aging society and care provider for the older population and for the aging society. And also there's, so related to that, there's shrinking of average household size and increased number of older family living alone. And how does the society move forward to prepare to taking care and support such a rapid aging society? Another point is that early on, the family planning policy was put in place to support economic development. But with much quicker aging society, this population structure also create the challenges and threat for the economic development because there's the risk of potential shrinking working force or working age population. So these are the major driving force for the discussion for policy change. But there were, rather than suddenly open it up, as we can see in the 2013, they're open to say both couple have to be single child, then they can have second, and move to 2015, there's universal two-child, now it's up to three-child. That part is because a debate whether if the government sudden loosen the policy, whether it have a short-term rapid population expansion and whether the infrastructure, public services can support that. So the Chinese government choose as more gradual changes and the reform. Yeah, but there are also other social unintended consequences in China, but I will see the population aging and the demand for economic development was the driving force for the policy reform.
Thank you, Dr. Guo. I think there's a very good point there. You mentioned that there are consequences, right? Mm-hmm. Unexpected and expected outcome of such policy implementation. So I just wonder if we can talk about it. Mm-hmm. Such policy aims to increase the birth rate. So the first question is, do we see a rise in birth rate? That means, is this type of policy effective in increasing birth rate?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of scholars and policy makers are pay attention to this, want to find the answer. I think on one hand is a little too quick to see the impact, but on another hand, we do see, for example, between 2013 to 2015, the family choose to have a second child among those who are eligible to have the second child is not as high as the government estimate before they release the policy. So using that indicator, we will see it's not change in policy or became eligible, allow people to have children is not automatically leads to people have another child. There are a lot of considerations for families and to make a decision to have another child. So it's I will see the implementation help those families who want to have another child now have the freedom to choose to do so. But the overall sudden to reverse the decline of fertility rates and increase the birth rates largely or rapidly, that's not as estimate as high as some of the estimation prior to the reform.
Yeah, thank you. And what do you think are the barriers for families wanting to have a second child? I know, for example, there's a cost related with raising a child. There is concern for, especially for women, right? Because women are the roles bearing the child care responsibility most, and there must be consequences for women and as well as their employment outcome. So just wonder, can we talk about a little bit what are the barriers for families of considering having a second or third child? Under these policies?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of discussions on whether it is public policy forum debate or discussion, or if you just look at the social media and discussion among the people. I think the economic pressure to raise a family or have a children is definitely there, and the demand for education and for housing in the urban area. Overall, the financial cost of raising family, having children, having another children is one of the concerns for the family members. And another part, as you mentioned, I agree, and I think the consideration of having another child, what does it mean for the women, particularly those women in the labor force, how it affects their employment is one of the major, one of the concern as well. Actually, myself and Dr. Liu, we're engaged with some of the studies to try to understand after the policy change into this two-child area and now is third-child area, how are some of the considerations of challenges for women, particularly working women? We have been looking at some data, particularly like newspaper articles and news media discussion. We did find the barriers or challenges for women in this new era to engage in labor force participation in job or employment. Some of the issue might be long-term issue, as we know gender equality is an issue around the world in many other countries as well. But under the two-child policy, it does create kind of the new challenges for women because it's changed the employer or the business side. When they hire people, they have different perceptions or expectations, and this might create barriers and or discriminations for women when they apply for job. Even for those who are in the labor force, when they choose to have a second child, and experience job disruptions through the maternity leave or some other leaves. And we do hear new stories of data to show they might have challenges in job promotion or job transitions. So I think in the new era, this definitely create the challenges for the family and for women, particularly working women with young children. And another line of thought is if those are challenges, what are state support, what are social policy can be there? So that's another aspect.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what can state come up with the policies and programs to support women while encouraging women to have more children. At the same time, not discourage them from labor force participation and still gain gender equality in the employment and labor force market. Because we still remember, China has since 1949 has a very important slogan that women can hold up half the sky, right? How do the policy support, services can be put in place for supporting women's employment under the change of family planning policy? That's a very interesting topic.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And another question, I don't know how much time we have. Another very interesting phenomenon is the change of gender ideology over the years. We see as a traditional Confucius ideology of women need to obey their son, husband, or brothers, right, in the past, to the change after 1950s. Women can have the sky, and then towards you mentioned earlier in your presentation about phenomenon of leftover women, right? That's a very interesting topic. What do you think that, do you see there's a change in the societal attitudes towards family, marriage, and gender ideology, along with the change in the family planning policy of China? Mm-hmm. How does that, for example, the phenomenon or the word, quote unquote, leftover woman was very, some even identified as a social problem, right, by state media. But however, in the recent 10 years, we do see some change, right? The leftover woman was very stigmatized in the past, but now it is not necessary that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. As I mentioned, this is an evolving social phenomena in China and certainly drawing the public's attention. And I think this link with the education attainments among the population, among the women, and how the life opportunity present to them. So speaking of this leftover women phenomena, I want to bring it into tied to this one-child policy is one of the unintended consequences of the one-child policy is the skewed sexual ratio at birth. So in China, the sexual ratio at birth between girls and boys is much more skewed than the natural trends. There's more boys was born than women, than girls, and so that can create the problems of the sexual ratio population structures. So relate to this, there's opinion to see in the family and marriage market, if we use the economic term, there's opinion to see A quality guy would find the B quality women, and B quality guy will find the C quality women, and the C quality men will find the D quality women. So what the people really left over are the A quality women and the D quality men. So refer as leftover women and surplus men. So what I like to point out is for the leftover women, there oftentimes are the three highs. They're highly educated, high income earner, and highly independent. So even though the leftover women seems to drawing a lot of media's attention, but given the skewed sexual ratio in China, the much larger population of boys, and I think the surplus men who oftentimes actually have the lower education level, lower socioeconomic status, they're actually an important social group and important issue need to attend it and to consider how to support this social group and what its impact the family and the marriage pattern in China. And also, as you said, I agree, and I think it's important to point it out. China's society has been changing and diversified through its social economic reform with the influence from the West and with the changing within themselves from the state-run planning economic into a more market-oriented economic system. So we should even though I present the traditional family value, we should recognize the vast changes of the family value and gender attitudes in China, and also just the diversity among the people, the value they're holding. Even, let's say, phenomena of leftover women also has been evolving. Some literature show the first this beginning merge as a social concept as early 2000, around 2005 or 2007. But I think the attitude towards the social group has also evolving and changing. Surveys show many of women, they do feel the pressures in a way, mostly from their parents. And but at the same time, they also feel they have a happy life, like they have the independence and the financial independence. So this social group itself and the societal attitude towards them has also evolving and changing. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very interesting because I also observe, because of the influence, especially it's a good, global community with the world getting more and more connected. The traditional Chinese ideology focus on collectivism. It's gradually changing towards more individualism, and more women are being aware of their rights and make the decision of what they want to do for their family and for their lives. I think that's a very interesting phenomenon of China, and I do think the policymakers should catch this nuance and accordingly implement or provide incentives to achieve, family policy goals.
I totally agree. I think it cannot emphasize enough as the large country as China, within the country, there's a social economic differences or disparities across region and province. And also, if we look at the population, there are also disparities and differences across different socioeconomic group, whether we look at the education level or employment status, and even the remaining disparity between urban area and the rural area, even though urbanization has reached to 60%, but still we have a large population or high percentage belong to in the rural area. So those differences and also reflect in their life and the attitudes people hold. So it's hard to tell one single China story, and it's always good to be mindful and recognize the differences and diversity within China's society.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. And there's a very interesting data I saw. There are several polls actually being conducted in 2016 and in 2019, different polls to survey whether women want to have more children or second child or third child or even want to have a child or get married. And these numbers are just decreasing to the extent 40%, for example, one study found that 40% of working women in China without children did not want to have children at all. So I think that reflects dramatic societal change in China, according to along with the change of the economy.
Yeah, I think another point, if I may share, is as myself do comparative family policy studies, I would like to see, even though today we focus on discussing the story in China, but we also see it might be helpful to put that in the global comparative perspective. Among many developing and developed countries, this decline of total fertility is kind of a common or universal phenomena, even in East Asian neighboring countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore are also among the society experience low and very, very low total fertility rates. I think China is a little bit more complex story because China have this one-child policy. But as data show, even before the one-child policy, there was a decline of total fertility rates. And now I think the very low total fertility rates are not solely because the one-child policy or family planning policy is certainly play a big role in China, but just look into other countries and consider the global development in many other countries. I think those are the common questions the society are facing in terms of the total fertility rates and the family and the marriage formation, and relate to welfare policies and social services. What's the best way to providing support to encourage and support a family to have a children, which is fundamentally support the society, and also help the women and the family to balance the demand from work and the family responsibilities.
Yes, it seems that there are a lot of challenges ahead, and there are a lot of discussion or research need to be done on this aspect.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we're not sure about the time. Maybe Professor Wang, we're happy to open for the audience, or if there are any questions from our audience. Yeah. you're muted. Excuse me.
Okay, great. We already have a very lively discussion, and thank you both for your lively presentation and conversation. And let's move into the Q&A session. And the first question I received is from Eric Thomas. He wonders, his question is, the economy will drop in population. Is any of the two, either of the two motivated China's child policy reform? I think he is trying to ask what's the major reasons for China's policy shift in family planning from one child to two child and three child. I think you have addressed this partly in your presentation and conversation. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think, Eric, thanks for the question. As we discussed, I think both the economic reasons, economic demand for workforce, and also the drop of population growth, or the aging population structure are two of the major driving force or factors for the government to consider policy change. And if I putting order, I think they both are important, but review some of the government documents. I think aging society and to have the support and the plan and the system to support the aging population and to promote the well-being of the population was quite frequently are cited for the reason for the reform. For the economic part, I think is important, but because China are still, as a large country, have a large population, and also with the economic format change, right? So the new economic or digital economic, informational economic might not purely or drive by number of population or workforce, but also depending on the different formats of economic. So, but the aging population is severe and real and changing rapidly. Because the large population, then the percentage refer to a quite large aging population. That has been one of the reasons often cited and mentioned in the government documents or in the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Our second question is from Jiawei Niu. You talked about the rank mating system used on Chinese social media, which has been a debate topic among feminists, KOIS. Do you think the idea of feminism and the debates about it online influence the women's will of giving birth in a way?
Good question. I think the rank mating, to me, I think that's the opinion. One theory of explanation to explain the leftover women and the surplus men. I think if you examine public attitudes, I believe people will be likely be influenced by those thoughts, or some people intuitively think this opinion or one way to explain makes sense. But I think for feminism or feminist scholars or feminist activism, again, I think in China, those all also come in many different formats. For example, on one hand, we have strong state feminism, right? Is calling for and ask for states intervention and the policy support to support women and working women. But on the other hand, the feminist movement is also influenced by the new thoughts or Western ideology, is more focused on, instead of focus on how have a service of support for women, is focused on the women's independence, women's equal rights to political, legal, political, economic rights, and even the rights for their own body, right? So that's another school of the feminist movements in China. I think we just have to recognize the nuance of different force, schools of the feminists of the South and activities in China. If my interpret how it's affect women's the willingness to give the birth, I do think there's more empowered attitude toward equal opportunity and women's independence, the choice they make for themselves, whether their own body or their own career, does have influence on the public's attitude to gender role. For example, as we mentioned, the highly educated group and college-educated women, their ideology towards the gender relations are very high, very progressive. Not only think women has a role in labor force or employment, but also strongly believe their equal rights to men in terms of their rights to job, their rights to leadership positions, their rights to education. So good question. I do think it's influence for public attitudes and women's decision as well.
Great. We have another question from...
Dr. Liu, feel free to chime in your thoughts as well. Yeah.
By all means, Dr. Liu, feel free to jump in into the discussion if you are interested.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Actually, I think Dr. Guo has a very good point. I'd just like to follow up. It's a great question. We do see social media play an important role in telling the stories, sharing the stories of gender discrimination for women. Although, for example, the leftover women, this term was framed in 2007 as a way to encourage women to get married and have babies. And then state media even also promoted this idea. However, in the last 10 years, the feminism has already made their voice heard in the social media about how this can be sexist and this gender discriminative phenomenon, and played an important role in promoting the awareness. And many, and as Dr. Guo also said, especially for graduate and university students or graduates, there's a big phenomenon of their sharing information about their experiences with sexism, and therefore refuse and encouraged to refuse to give in to unwanted pressure of marriage and having babies. So I think social media played an important role in this phenomenon.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Liu. Our next question is from Minbao Yu. If the new expansion of one-child policy has triggered discussion about gender equality policy at the workplace to protect women?
Great question. Thank you. I think certainly it has, and because if you look at the social media or even the policy debate among the scholars, and the first reaction is another child, how can I afford to have another child, and how it's going to affect my career and my life. And so there are a lot of discussion, as I mentioned, especially in recent move to the third child policies. There are lots of the discussion about why we need to change, how we change it. It's more about if we want to change it, if we really want to support and encourage people to have children, what do we need to do? And in Chinese context, oftentimes they turn to what government need to do, right? So what the states need to do. And there are actually a lot of discussion focused on different areas, and one line of thought per some of our study to show one line is focused on like financial or taxation policies and to support the business, and then therefore they can support all avoid the discrimination for female employees. So that's one line to see, make sure we have taxation, they have taxation or subsidy or the financial policy to support the business, then they can implement more equal treatment to female employee that's the one side on the Social Security, financial and tax policies. Another line of thought is really the Anti-Discrimination Law. And this is the more focused on how to providing legal aid for women when they encounter discrimination in the job in the workplaces. In China, there's a labor law and contract law. There are certain protections. For example, during the pregnancy, female employee cannot be eliminated. There's a law to protect that. But the data or discussion shows is some of the labor law women's rights protection law are too broad and generic and the lack of a detailed rule and administrative rule to see how to providing legal aids when it really happens, when women really encounter those discriminations and the challenges. So on one hand, there's law to protect it. On the other hand is the challenges of using that rule to really fight discrimination. So among the lawyers and labor lawyers, the discussion is how do we really develop the regulation rules can really be useful to support women to providing support on anti-discrimination in job places, from job searching to job promotion and job promotion and the changes. Yes, I think this new era of two-child policy and three-child policy definitely join the public and policymakers' attention to look at the anti-discrimination laws based on gender. Yeah.
Great. Our next question is, does the tendency of A-level women to marry European Americans and the D-level men to find wives from Southeast Asia or South Asia show up in the statistics at all? This question is from Cindy Nin.
Thank you, Cindy, for that question. Again, I don't have handy data to really show this, but if follow this opinion or this explanation and looking into the more global comparative stance, I can speak on for no better words, follow this opinion or this theory to consider D-quality men. I see in neighboring countries like Japan, South Korea, in recent decades, it has seen the increase of international marriage or interracial marriage. Japanese or Korean men, which often also in low socioeconomic status, such as in the rural area, will seeking international marriage and have bride or wife migrant from Southeast Asian country. So if we see the lesson from those countries, it does happen, and as a social response to the needs of that society, and it creates this new challenges and demand to see how society integrate those migrants' wives and brides, and how it's mean for the diversity of those societies. In China, again, I have not seen the first-hand data, have not really dive into study this question. I think it's a great question. One thing I was thinking is because China is such a large country, as I mentioned, there's a disparity across the region and across the province. So in the past, I see some sociology study to consider certain area when they have hard to find the bride or wife in the local area, they go to more remote and less developed region, such as, for example, Southwest region, and seeking the marriage across the region within China. But with the more globalized society, this will be a question to look into. Yeah, great question.
Great. I have a question for Dr. Guo or Dr. Miu. Can you talk a little bit about the population census conducted last year, the results, and how it led to this radical shift in family planning policy, shifting to the three-child policy, because the result is really shocking. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the most immediate factors leading to this policy change, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And for my study or attention, I will point it out the sharp decrease of total fertility rates again. 2020 census data shows the total fertility rates in China is only 1.3, which is even lower than the 2010 census data at that time still recorded as 1.6. So within 10 years, this fertility rate continued decrease. And now I believe the 1.3 is really belong to one of the few lowest level across the country, across the world. I think that definitely is one of the shocking data, and even among the people study population structures, and they really raise the questions and how this means for the population growth. What does it mean for the accelerating aging population or aging society, the process? And also because since 2013 is already starting reform, have the two-child policy, right? So we already entered the two-child policy almost 6-7 years. Between the 13 and the 15, we see the implementation of people take on this newly allowed second child is much less than what is estimated as the number of eligible population. And so by the 2015, it's allowed universal two-child policy, but by the 2020 census data, 5 years, short period of time. But again, all this immediate indicator tell the policymaker and also make the public realize population growth and the trends of this fertility rates is not the button you can easily push on and push off. Even with the ending of one-child policy, these trends and changing won't immediately turn around. Actually, a lot of a lot of scholars actually think learning from the lesson from other developing country or low fertility country, people generally think it won't have an immediate or quickly impact on change population growth or fertility rates change. What people agree on to see with this change will resolve some of the problems in the past, like coercive policy implementation, or think about reproductive rights and freedom for families. So this policy change will help that to allow the family who want to have another child can do it. So providing more friendly social environment to encourage and allow people to have children should they want it. But in terms of projection, how it's immediate change the population structure, and also the recent indicator of policy results suggesting it won't change the trends and the population structure in the near future. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. I want to, okay, Dr. Niu, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say a couple of comments on that. I think that's a very good question, and Dr. Guo has a very good point on it. I think overall it just reflects a general change or trend as China is developing its economy in the last several decades. As Dr. Guo also mentioned, that this decrease in birth rate has already been observed in other Asian countries, for example, in Japan before, and China is experiencing it. So we don't really see a policy change will bring up the birth rate in the short term only by the change of policy itself. The bigger societal context is more and more women, more and more families growing into the middle class. And more women become middle class as well, and especially those who are well educated. and they want to make decisions of their, employment, their marriage. They don't want to be controlled by, for example, in the past by in-laws or husband or, the traditional family figure. I think in this context, they want to pursue their free careers and do not want to be burdened by one or more children. So I think this decrease in birth rate can also be reflected, not only the birth rate decrease, but also the marriage rate decrease from the census survey. The marriage rate, the first-time marriage dropped by 41% from 2013 to 2019. So that reflects a value change in attitude towards myself and my family.
That's definitely right. Thank you for your clarification on this point. I just think, the census is really a very important factor motivated the Chinese policymaker to make this dramatic policy change, because it is really shocking. According to this census, about 12 million babies were born last year. This is the lowest point since 1960s, in the past 60 years. And Dr. Guo just mentioned the fertility rate is just 1.3. This is way below the fertility rate to reproduce the size of the population. So it is really shocking. And I think it motivated a series of other policy changes in the fields of education, after-school training, because one of the key factors that hinders the young couple's decision to have a child is this living cost in the big cities. China's urban area has the highest child rearing cost of anywhere in the world. And this led to the lowest fertility rate in the world. So the government is trying to figure out how to increase the income, the disposable income of ordinary young couple family, and so that they can, have more kids. So they crush the education, the after-school training, and the many other measures in order to, increase the, ability of the young couples to have more children. I think, what do you think of this congestion?
Yeah, I think the government and the society need seeking answers in many different areas. And one thought is really how to support family to having children. So as we mentioned, the taxation of financial support for business at one side, focus on legal aids and anti-discrimination for in the workplace. Those are two lines of thought to looking for social solutions. Another stream we have been observed is really call for strong supportive social services for family and family with children. And this also has been testing or experiencing other welfare states or other developed countries. Within these social services, looking at a combination of financial support and social services for family and family with children. For example, financial support can come in the format as a child allowance, directly give child allowance for family by having children to reduce the cost of having children, all through taxation system. Even in U.S. context, this year, many of family with children are received child tax credits or payments, and those are another format through taxation or child allowance to providing financial subsidy for family with children. Another type of the social support are given the women, not just women, I should say, given the working families and the working parents, the needed leave to taking care of children in the format, whether it's maternity leave, paternity leave, and parental leave, to allow the family can have the job secured, paid leave to taking care of families and taking care of their children when they need it. China, in a comparative sense, has had the maternity leave, and in recent year, after the two-child policy, we see some regions and provinces has expanded their maternity and paternity leave. They're starting to have discussions and policy implementation like a daddy quota to set up certain days and leave for fathers or for men to support as having children and have family as well. So providing those type of supported leave and paid leave is important. Another side of the support under social services will be childcare. Whether it's a preschool or nursery, this is a whole another policy debate. In the most recent year, for example, after the economic reform, under the state feminism, those work unit or Danwei sponsored the nursery childcare has almost demolished and disappeared largely, except a few system of work units largely has been disappeared, and the child support has largely met by family or by economic solutions. So now when this considered as the social issue, not just the family private issue, this call for support for childcare is another big one. But in recent year, because it's market oriented and also because there's a change of emphasize child support more on educational perspective, you will hear people talk about child development, how important preschool education important for school readiness, for child development, but less emphasized to put on the role of the child care and child care support on supporting family, supporting working parents. I think under the new era, this has been brought up and look into and to see how to providing child support and not only preschool focus on education, but even the younger age from 0 to 3, what are some societal solutions besides the family support to providing childcare, providing support for family with children, with babies. So I think data and the new changes is raise the big question for those type of discussions. And we certainly see it's happening. A lot of different ideas, different solutions are brought it. I'll wait to see how this potentially play out. And my thought is we have to pay attention to, on one hand, policy development. On another hand is policy implementation. That's why we bring in this gender ideology. It's so important. Again, learn lesson from other countries like Japan and South Korea in recent years has implemented more progressive family policy. For example, give daddy the quota to have a paternity leave, but the leave taking, the percentage of men really take those leave when they're eligible, have the right to, are relatively low. Means it's there, policy is there, but people take it that are not there. And studies show it has been influenced by company culture, societal culture, people's role on gender expectations. So I think China will facing the similar things even when we are developing those countries, developing those policies. But how do we implement that? How do we, working with the changing social values and the public attitude to make that really accepted and really work for the family and for the working parents.
Very good. Dr. Niu, you have something to share with us?
I think Dr. Guo is a very comprehensive summary of what are the supportive services need to be put in place for supporting family, to have more babies. On the other side, I think I was wondering, it's interesting to look at China is a very diverse country with both rural and urban areas has very different needs for economic needs and the needs for family, and also will be impacted differently by the policy change. So I just wonder if it's very interesting to talk briefly about this, Dr. Guo.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so how do you think the different impact, how this policy will impact differently on rural versus urban area population or families? On what are the different supported services should be provided into these two different population? I mean, to a great extent, it's a very different system, right, in a lot of areas. So what do you think should be put in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the disparity between urban area and the rural area remained huge. As we mentioned, even with 60% urbanization, given the large population size, that means large population still living in the rural area. We didn't mention this today, but for those of you you might know, interesting is in China, we still have this hukou system. It's a residential registration system. It's put in a simple way is by register as a resident in the urban area and the rural area, you might entitled to different sites and different level of social support or social services support, from Social Security to healthcare and to education. So this institutional policy is still in place, and that creates a special challenge for a group we call the within country migrant population. So people are registered as rural residents, but they seeking job opportunities or doing job in the urban area, which is became available under the more market-oriented economic system, but they still facing the challenges in terms of their rights or their welfare relate to different social services system. And speaking of family and marriage, and there are a lot of attention focused on left behind children or children of migrant population, and how to support them, which is quite unique of different challenges, and I think it deserves a whole different topic to really pay attention to that. But I totally agree the differences between urban and the rural, and the unique phenomena of migrant population from rural area to urban in this continued urbanization process in China will remain a big question to look into. Another point, if I might add, is a lot of social phenomena and the social media and discussion, even as we see the TV drama or movie shows, a lot of social discourse might be made as the urban scenario more apparent and more likely to occupy the discourse stage, and some of the issues among rural population or rural area are less likely to become a major stage or drawing a lot of attention. I think that's need to continue looking into. Yeah. Then, for example, if look at the specific like childcare support or preschool education, even elementary school level education, there are huge disparities. Situations are quite different in urban area and the rural areas. Yeah.
Great. Dr. Niu, that's a great question. I think rural-urban gap play a very important role in government policy making on family planning and birth restriction. And that's one of the reasons why the birth restrictions are not completely lifted right now. Because according to my understanding, rural people have are more willing to have more kids. They have more incentive to do that. But urban folks were less willing to do that. So The government worried that if opened up completely, more rural birth, which create poverty issue and the rural employment issue, is going to mess up the whole situation. A very important characteristic of Chinese reform is step-by-step reform. We can still see very clearly from 1 child, 2 child, 3 child, maybe after several years, it will be completely opened up, but not right now. Thank you very much. What a lively discussion. Unfortunately, our time is up. A big mahalo to our speakers again for joining us and for sharing with us your great insights and expertise. And many thanks as well to the audience for submitting so many interesting questions. And before you go, a quick reminder that we have another event on October 20th focusing on China's electrical vehicles market and the role of Tesla. We hope you can join us again. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time. Mahalo.